It's Urban Woman with me, Razia Rangrage. I am live on Facebook and YouTube, so hop on and join us on our screens, not just on the airwaves. We're talking about something very interesting. We're talking about basically speech therapy, so you got to understand a little bit more about it, what parents often miss about speech therapy. And when we hear the words basically speech therapy, many of us immediately think of children struggling to pronounce, isn't it? To pronounce certain words and things like that, or letters. But what if that understanding is far too narrow? And in the process, some children actually missing out on support that actually could change the way they learn, communicate, and connect with the rest of the world. So let's understand this a little bit more. Joining us now on our screens and the areas of Razia Rangrage International is Sister Atiya Donabai, who is a speech therapist and audiologist. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Atiya, and welcome to Urban Women and Razia Rangrage this morning.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah so much for having me on the show. It's an absolute pleasure.
Barakallahu fiqh. We thank you for your time. Now, I think this is something that we all really do need to understand, because when we hear speech therapy, as I said, is probably when kids are struggling, but now clearly there's more. What are some early signs that parents or teachers might miss that point to language or communication difficulties?
Okay, so Razia, as you mentioned before, that most parents think that speech therapy means fixing the way someone pronounces or the way someone talks. But I think that many children and many individuals actually experience speech difficulties. And it's not always just not talking or not pronouncing, but early signs may often be subtle. And I think it's important to pay attention to some of these signs. So things like children speaking a lot, they say, oh, my child talks, they talk a lot. They started talking at an early age, but what they're saying doesn't really make any sense. They can't, they use their own kind of language, or they'll point to something and say, just give me that, give me this, but they're not using actual vocabulary. So they're using pointing, and they're not able to name items, so they mask really well the fact that they actually might be struggling with acquiring new words, learning new language. Things like following instructions, go to the room and fetch your shoes and your bag. And they really struggle with something like this. And you have to repeat yourself or rephrase the instruction many different times. This is a sign that they might not have good language or understanding skills. Things like answering questions, or explaining events, like what did you do at your granny's house? How was school? Who was there? Basic questions like that. And then they struggle to answer, or they struggle to understand what you're actually asking them. That's a sign that, look, there might be some kind of language difficulties there. Even struggling to retell a story. So, what did this person tell you? Or what was the story about? Or what did you see on the television? Things like that is also, given their age, might be a sign that there is some kind of communication difficulties. And I think the main thing to look at is, how do they interact in social settings? How are they with other people? When it comes to, someone asking them a question, are they frustrated, anxious, withdrawn? You notice they're reluctant to communicate. This might be an indication that they have some difficulty with actually getting their needs and wants across. And they might not be shy or distracted or not listening. It's just that there might be a language processing or communication issue there that we're missing.
So it's so important that we pay attention and just don't overlook and take it for like it's normal, so to say. So observe your little one and don't take things for granted. Share with us, Sister Atiya, how do speech and also language skills affect a child's readiness for school even before formal learning begins?
Okay, so that's a really important question, because remember that speech and language skills actually form the foundation for all learning, for all social interactions, for all emotional needs, because children need to be able to explain how am I feeling? Why am I tired? Why am I angry? And going to school, they need to have a foundation in understanding basic concepts. And they need to be able to understand instructions, ask for help, request their basic needs and wants, and also understand other people's feelings, communication, be able to sit in a classroom setting, be able to listen to what the teacher is saying, and to be able to build those social relationships. And I think you can't sit in a classroom and understand when your teacher is angry, understand when another child is upset, understand when you are upset, and be able to communicate that need, or tell your teacher, I'm hungry, I need to go to the toilet, I want a pencil. You can't be using the language you use at home that your mom understands, but the rest of the world doesn't understand. So I think
Mm.
effective communication, even before formal learning, is the foundation for everything that comes thereafter.
So important. And so important to teach the child also correctly initially. Some people will do the baby language, and then I always say it's like
Exactly. And
teaching
that's actually discouraged because
them. 'Cause
you, yeah, because children, they learn from the age of 0 to 3. Even though they're not speaking, they're absorbing everything you say. And you're going to say, oh, yes, the mama, oh, let's go do do. And that's the words that they learn. So
Correct.
it's important to actually use correct, appropriate language with them from the onset.
Absolutely. And I was teaching them English and then trying to teach them German after that. And then they're like, oh, what are you actually, I think nowadays we are all bombarded by one thing that we really can't get rid of, right? And it's the screen. And unfortunately, kids are no exception. So let's talk about screen or
Mhm.
reducing screen time, so to say. How does human interaction differ from educational apps when it comes to language learning?
Okay, so if I can put it this way, educational apps are better than just watching cartoons and watching Coco Melon. So if you have to
Right.
choose between the two, obviously an educational
Let's go
app
with
is the
screen.
way to go. But
Right.
they can support learning. They should not replace human interaction. So when you're
Mm,
trying to teach your child concepts, vocabulary, you shouldn't stick them in front of a screen with little flashcards that say apple, orange, and that's how they're learning their vocabulary. It should be
yeah.
used in supplementation to what you are actually teaching them. So maybe showing them a little video on the screen, because I think it's also important to be realistic. We cannot remove screens completely. In this day and age, screen time is a reality. So how
Yep.
can we make it work to our advantage? We need to teach them turn taking, real time feedback. You need to model language for them. So use the
Mm,
screen as a supplement. Put that little app on, put a little story on, and then pause it in between and say, what did you see? Did you see the bear? Did you see the little porridge? Did you see the apple? And use it in conjunction with natural communication. Because remember, screen time doesn't teach conversation, it's just the screen talking to the child. They're not learning
right.
how to answer a question, how to
Mhm.
understand what the next person is saying, how to take turns, how to interpret questions. So I think in supplementation, but also within limits.
Right.
Screen time shouldn't be used to replace any kind of natural learning or natural human interaction. And the bright colors and all of that, you might see a spike in ADHD and children not being able
Yeah.
to sit still and not being able to concentrate. It's because those fast colors on the screen constantly changing. It,
Right.
it alters the way a child's brain actually works and responds in
Mm.
normal situations.
Absolutely. It makes so much of sense. I think it's so important that we understand the actual deeper impact. So everything in balance, limits,
Exactly.
not replacing. I liked how you said Apple, but you sounded just like those apps, honestly. Yeah. I think some parents may actually say, okay, let me wait and see. Let's wait this out and see how my child improves. So share with us what are the risks then of adopting the wait and see approach when it comes to speech and learning?
Okay, I think that's also like a very good and important question. I think parents underestimate their own intuition. I think
Oh,
as a parent, the minute something is wrong, you know something is
you
wrong.
know. Yeah.
Whether you know the red flags for speech delay, whether you know what this means and that means, you as a parent intuitively
Yeah.
know
You
something
feel
is
it,
not
yeah.
right. Something
True.
is not right with my child. And then
Mm,
parents sometimes say, or they get advice from others, oh, my son also spoke late, and don't worry, you also spoke late, and, just wait and see, he'll talk, and boys are later than girls, and, all these excuses that then come,
mm,
and then you think, okay, you know what, let me wait. But I
mm.
think what's important is that there's a critical period of brain development for a child. Usually it's between 0 to 3 years. That's what we
Okay.
call early intervention. And early
Okay.
intervention will support development during this most effective and critical period. And
Mm,
remember that if you wait longer, you only increase the gap between your child and their peers, you only create more anxiety for them, and you only make it more difficult to remediate something that could have been handled early on. So
Absolutely.
I think that don't be scared to just get an assessment. If you feel that something is wrong, don't be scared to go and get an assessment and say, as a professional, do you think that what my child is doing is age appropriate? Is there something that's not right? Or is there something I
Mhm.
can do in the meantime to just support my child so they can
Yeah.
catch up a bit better? So I
Mm.
think that you can delay support and development if you wait too long. So don't be
Mm.
scared to get that assessment.
So important, hey? I mean, you can nip it in the bud and you can reconnect instead of that railway going right off. You can do something to get it in line, inshallah. That's so
Inshallah.
important. You're talking about assessments, and I think a lot of parents are probably sitting with some sort of fear or hesitation. What
Mhm.
would you say to them, to those parents that are basically a little bit hesitant or fearful or doubtful of getting that assessment done for their child?
I think what I could say is that an assessment is not always a diagnosis or a label. Sometimes it's just information. And the more
Mm.
empowered you are, the more you can help your child. Remember, as a parent, if you're not sure exactly what is going on, you can't give the support that is needed to help your child. So, an assessment just helps to identify what are their strengths, where's the areas that they might need support, and is intervention required or not. And what I've noticed is that a lot of parents have anxiety before, but actually feel relief after they get that assessment because there's some kind of clarity, there's some kind of guidance, and sometimes just reassurance or strategies or something simple is the outcome, and like
Mm.
seeking that early support, it's an act of care, not fear. And I think
Yeah.
that parents shouldn't fear what happens in an assessment. Most of the time it's just guidance, and it's for
Mm.
your well-being and your child's well-being, instead of you sitting there feeling helpless and powerless as to what can I do to help my child. And that gap of language delay and difficulty is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Absolutely. Well said. Because I think most of the time it's actually the fear of what I could hear, the fear of how my child may be perceived by other people.
Exactly.
Comparison comes in. It's all of these things that I think go so quickly through our brain that we don't realize until we just sit and say, what is important here right now? It is my child. If I don't sort it out right now, what kind of an adult are they going to then grow up in? Do I need to support that? Because essentially, I'm not going to be around forever. Who's going to be there to take
Exactly.
care of my children? Is the fears of society and also our perception and how we want to come across that important, and is that serving us, or is it the well-being of my child? And there's so much support out there, like speech therapist, audiologist, and it's just amazing if we can just allow ourselves to come out of that limited tunnel vision and look at that bigger picture. Allah Azza wa Jal has created everybody and every child with such gems within them. And of course, as parents, they are our amana. It's important for us to be able to nurture and hone in on that and provide whatever support we can, letting go of that fears, because that's all it is, isn't it? Fears, false evidence appearing real, but not really real. It's so wonderful.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for chatting with us about this important topic, and we thank you for your time. Until we connect again, any last words?
I think, like you said, seek help. It's there. Help is there. Do not fear. Don't let society and stigma impact the decisions that you make. And not every child has weaknesses. Everyone has strengths, and you just need to find those strengths and work on them. So, Jazakallah so much for having me on the show. It was an
Yeah,
absolute pleasure.
was the pleasure's ours. Thank you so much for your time. Assalamu alaikum wa
Wa
rahmatullahi
alaikum
wa barakatuh.
salam.
And that was Sister Atia Dadabai, a speech therapist and audiologist. We were talking about basically what parents often miss out about speech therapy. So don't wait and see. Your child is important. And as we understand, 0 to 3 years, it's a very important period. Let's go for a break. I'll be back with you in a bit. It is